Hey guys, it's Shane from the Australian Karate Academy in Brisbane, and I'm here with my dad, Bob McMahon, who started karate a long time ago, and we're here to have a quick chat about karate that we've done before and karate now and karate in the future. So, Dad, welcome. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Okay, well, I'm Bob McMahon, as you just said, and I've got 4 dedicated karateka children, nearly all still training, and I come from Brisbane. That's where I've spent most of my karate career, not overseas, but in Brizzy.
And when did you first start karate?
Well, the first couple of lessons that I had, a friend at school, I think his name was Danny Mitchell, and we were 13, 14, and he started training first and he invited me to go along. And we got a train into the valley, and somewhere off Brunswick Street, there was a guy called John Ryan. And John Ryan is pretty well known. I think he's a bit of a guitar player and singer, some sort of entertainer. But he had a dojo, and we went along there.
Right.
So at 14 years of age, it was very, when I say rough, not rough as in not very technical. And the main part of the training for the first time that I went was to stand in kibadachi and do straight punches off the hip. And if you made a mistake, or you said damn or something worse, you were supposed to put money in a swearing jar. And and I said something like, "Oh shit," and he said, "You have to put 2 bob into the jar." I said, "I'm not putting any more money in. I'd already paid 50 cents or $1 or whatever it was." So that was in my first lesson, and he said, "I can see you're a troublemaker," and he was right. I was, but that was sort of the main part of the lesson, and we just did a few things. And after, we used to go only on a Saturday, and I think on the second or third Saturday, he said the next weekend he was going to be holding training up in some forest, and it was going to be fighting from trees. And even at that young age, I was pretty skeptical, and I thought, this sounds like BS, and I didn't go back there again. But that was my first experience. He was in Kempo or something or other, and he ended up over in Western Australia, and I think he's still in Perth, and I think he's got a PAWN pawn shop of some sort.
Okay.
So there you go.
That's it. So was it 1967?
Oh, something like that, yeah. And then my best friend at school that lived a street or two away, Danny Ellaby, he was training with Tamio Suji from Seiku Khan in the valley. And Danny sort of said, "Why don't you come along and train there?" Well, the valley was a long way from Brighton where I lived. And of course at 14 or something, 15, didn't have much transport except the train. It was a long trip in, and then a big walk from there to where his dojo was. So I actually went along to a couple of dojo. I went to, I got the train into Roma Street and went to Greg Story's dojo, but it would have been Laurie Vanderkirk's then. And they weren't Shukakai. I can't remember what the name of the style was then, but it was some sort of Storu-based style. And Paul Hallis was there, and Bruce Hurd. There was a whole stack of those sorts of guys there, and I was a beginner, and they were, green belts, and which was pretty high up then, and there might have even been a couple of brown belts, which were, close to God.
Yeah. And was it just karate that you were interested in doing?
Yeah. Well, we really didn't know much about karate then. We'd seen some of the Elvis movies where there was, a few arm locks and strikes against the arms and stuff. So we really just didn't know too much about it. And the books that were around at that stage were very, very basic. I think my first book was Matsumuro Oyama, whatever his first name was, and What is Karate? That was the name of it. But I went from there. Hey? Sorry, but I didn't hear you.
The Kyokushin Masoyama, I mean?
Yeah, Maso Oyama. And I do remember it at Rembukan training there on the first night. There were probably about 20 of us or something in not a really big area, but we were expected to learn this kata. It might have been Pinan Nidan or Pinan Shodan. And I was sort of like about the middle of the group, really, 3 rows back from the front and, a few people on either side of me. And we had to follow along. Well, what a joke. It's really hard. I just say this, just the training methods, they were pretty basic everywhere.
Yeah.
So, having hardly done anything at all on the night itself, here I was trying to do front stance and God knows what. And I just remember it just must have been like a yard full of chooks. Like some people knew what they were doing, but those that didn't were getting in their road. It was very funny. But I did go up a few times, and then a friend of mine said that there was the same sort of club over at Redcliffe. So and that was the Shukukai Club. I remember that. So I went over there with a friend. I think it was, what was his name? Daryl Anderson. And I went over there. And they had this thing. They used to get a phone book. This instructor was a brown belt, again, close to God. And he put the phone book up on his, he got a student. And he put a phone book up on his chest, and then he hit it. And he, really used his hip and was talking about this double hip movement they used to talk about then. And I'd made the mistake of saying to him that I'd been along. I must have been to Tamio Suji's before then, and somehow, and then I ended up going over there to have a look. And anyway, he was sort of. I think I went to Tamio's once too, and he was saying how I was a student of Tamio Suji and how their style of punching was a lot better than Tamio Suji's style. And he got my poor friend Daryl to hold his telephone book up against his chest, and he wanted me to punch it. And I'd had virtually, very little training in punching, but when people put you on the spot like that, you sort of think, oh, I'm going to make a fool of myself if I don't do something here. So I hit it as hard as I could and knocked Daryl flat on his back on the floor.
Yeah. How much training had Daryl done?
Oh, 1 or 2 lessons. He had no clue. But there we were, he was the Shukukai expert and I was the Seikukan expert. And anyway, so this instructor got Daryl up and said, now I'm going to hit it. And he hit it, knocked Daryl back about a foot. And so
just to beat you.
We moved on to something else. And I knew that I'd never get on at that dojo after that.
Yeah.
So, and I think, I know why I didn't start Tamio's. Danny Ellaby, he had gone up to Gove for work. And, I don't think I had any way of getting over there. And so when Danny came back from Gove, I went back over there.
So how did you start with was Seikukan or Seidokan back then?
It was Seidokan back then, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I went to Tamio's for a little while, but in karate, especially in the early days, and it's still this way in a lot of dojo today, how Tamio used to structure his classes was there was a beginner's class, a yellow belt's class, an orange belt, a green belt, a blue belt, brown and black belts, just like that on sort of different nights. About 3 classes a night for an hour and a half or whatever it was, or an hour for the beginners and so forth. And the yellow belts didn't talk to the white belts. There was a clear difference. And the orange belts, you know, the not near God yet, they didn't talk to the yellow belts. And the green belts, you know, the orange belts were just rubbish as far as I was concerned. It was very, very strange. And there was a girl, her name was Debbie something or other, and she was a brown belt. And she was the receptionist. And she used to talk to us guys, you know, like we were dirt because we weren't a brown belt. And at the end of the class, at the start of the class, I remember she threw a wet rag at me and said, "Down on your knees and you've got to scrub the floor." I said, you know, I saw these other guys doing it. So we'd put the rag on the floor. You would have seen it somewhere, I suppose, and you push all your way up and clean the floor. But the way she spoke to us, you know, it was just like a dog sort of thing. And the next night I went over, or the next time I went over, I think I went twice a week, she said to me, "Come on, you've got to clean the floor." And I said, "I'm not cleaning the floor." And I walked out and I went downstairs to the change room. So she went and told Tamio. She said, "This guy's a real troublemaker."
Troublemaker again.
Again, yeah. So anyway, so we didn't stay there, and then Danny came back from Gove. Well, the difference when I went, Danny said, "Come in with me." You know, he said, they're just being a bit silly. Don't worry about it. So I walked in with Danny, who was like, you know, one of their top students, who was a black belt then, and everyone was really friendly to me. There was no more of that, you know, don't talk to the white belt, because I was Danny Ellaby's friend. So even the girl on the reception thing never said a word to me, just say hello, you know, and that was about it. And Tamio was even nice.
Oh, right. So was it just adults training then?
Adults and maybe some kids about 12 or 13 or something like that. There was never any young ones, really young ones. At none of the dojo, nobody had the kids. Just, you know, just a few of them, you know, if your dad trained there or an older brother or somewhere, and you were more like 11 or 12, so they just sort of could train with the adults a bit. But yeah, so anyway, I started training there for a while. I quite liked it, you know. The only thing was Tamio would get people out the front and demonstrate a punch or a kick on them. And I'd seen him do it a couple of times, so I was ready for it. So, you know, I was like 68 or 70 kilo, ringing wet. And I was probably 16 or 17 by then. I get the years mixed up a little bit, but anyway, he got me out the front and kicked us in the stomach, knocked me back 3 or 4 feet. But because I knew he was going to kick me, I just tightened my tummy and went with it. He got me out another time and, you know, reverse punched me in the stomach. And again, I went with it. So some of the poor guys that, you know, the beginners that had no idea what was about to happen would get folded in half and end up on the floor. Oh, it was really very, it was an aggressive sort of training sessions that you went into. But
how long were you with Tamio Suji for?
Maybe a couple of months, I suppose.
And
I'm not really.
Was it? Was this club called just Suji Khan?
No. It was Seiku Khan.
What's Seiku Khan?
Seiku Khan. He came out from Japan on a merchant ship, and John Halpin, Danny, and a few others there had a sort of a loose club, and they used to go down to the ships and look for Japanese instructors or anyone that taught, you know, knew karate. And they often came home with someone from a different art, so like jiu-jitsu or aikido or something like that. And one day they stumbled across Tamio Suji, and Tamio was only a young man, 20, 22, 23 or something like that. And he came up and taught, and he loved Brisbane. Lots of Japanese people always love the weather here, and it's a big country town in a sense. And so somehow, the guy that used to run that was, I think his name was Wayne Williams, and he was learning out of a book, probably what is karate by Masayama, and teaching it that way. And somehow he got to be a green belt. I've got no idea how. But anyway, so he was, Tamio ended up coming out to Australia. They had a guy in the club who had a businessman that had a bit of clout. And I think, what was his name at the time? There was a politician, Don Johnson or something. I might have that wrong, but he ended up the first president of the FACO, which was the Federation of Australian Karate Organisations, prior to the AKF, changing the name to that. And he got Tamio, he assisted Tamio in migrating to Australia. So anyway, at Danny's 21st, I went along to that, and John Halpin was there at this party. And Danny and John and Graham Kelleher and a couple of others had been very good friends at Seikukan, and the three of them actually represented Australia for the first time in the in a world championship in Tokyo somewhere. And so that was interesting. And I met John. He was a nice guy. I quite liked him. And Danny said to me, "Look, he's got a club at Wavell Heights, which is a lot closer for you." He said, "If you want to go there, why don't you go and give that a go?" So I did, and stayed there for 18 years, I think.